talked about it, you mentioned it back. You made your debut in 1995 for ECW in the event Enter the Sandman. How was your experience while working with ECW? How was your relationship with Paul Heyman back then? What was so special about working for Extreme Championship Wrestling?
Well, I had known Paul Heyman for years, actually from the 80s. And he called me, and you remember I had worked all the mainstream companies, WCW, Florida Championship Wrestling, WWF. And when Paul Heyman called me, he said, "Hey, Fonzie, I got this idea. I want you to come up and do something at ECW." I said, "What's an ECW? I never heard of it." So he said, "This is a company where I'm starting it, and it's hardcore and so on and so on." And he flew me up, and I ended up loving it. And I was supposed to go up for 4 weeks, ended up staying 5 years and becoming the manager of champions. I loved it. I got along great with Paul Heyman. And we kind of started the hardcore syndrome. We were underground, black market, hardcore, sex and violence. It was terrific. And there was an audience for it. And man, I was right on top. I had a great position. How lucky can a man be?
So
But
I'm
you
gonna
gotta have talent also, Daddy. If I didn't have talent, I wouldn't have lasted 5 years.
Well, that's true. I'm going to translate the previous statement, and this one's in Spanish. Bill Alfonso es el manejador actual de la única superestrella sudamericana, Ariel Levy y Vinicius, los campeones en pareja, y él quiere llegar a Puerto Rico para destruir a los Colón nuevamente. Los respeta de igual manera, pero quiere llegar a Puerto Rico, Bill Alfonso, al igual que lo hizo en su momento dado en los 80, y junto con sus chicos, con Ariel Levy y Vinicius, derrotar a los Colón, que respeta su talento, que respeta su trayectoria, que son superestrellas internacionales, pero que sabe que Bill Alfonso es mejor que ellos, al igual que el resto de sus muchachos. Y hablando de su talento en la antigua ECW, that's a nice shirt.
Hey, Dusty was very instrumental in getting me my job. Very instrumental of guiding my career and helping me have a long-time contract with TBS.
What's your story and your background with Dusty Rhodes? How he was the person that helped you in order to do this profession?
Well, when I started refereeing in Florida in 1980, Dusty Rhodes, he was the booker. And he taught me a lot. And I adapted to the business really good. And then when he went to work for Ted Turner in Atlanta, WCW, he asked me to come with him, and I did.
So I'm going to translate that to Spanish. La persona que inicialmente le da su oportunidad es The American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Es la persona que le da su oportunidad, que se lo lleva de regreso a trabajar con Ted Turner y las diferentes personas, y le brinda esa oportunidad y ese trabajo. What's the story behind the famous whistle that Bill Alfonso has always around his neck? In every match, we've seen you with your little thing with your whistle, pumping your wrestler, hyping everyone in the matches. What was the story? How did the whistle ended up being part of your gimmick?
You mean this one?
Jesus Christ. Exactly that one.
I love my whistle. It was Paul Heyman's idea. When I switched from referee to management, he said, "Fonzie, blow the whistle, do your thing. You're hyper already. I don't even drink coffee and I'm hyper. You know what I mean?" He said, "Blow the whistle. People are identify it with you." So everywhere I went, I blew my whistle, and it distractions and added, and it was a hype, like you just said. So if you didn't know who I was, you didn't know my name, you say, "Oh, you're that guy who blows the whistle." So, it works for me, Daddy, and I like it.
Perfect. Paul Heyman,
right here for you, Michael. I'm going to send it. When I come to Puerto Rico to kick Carlos Colon's boys' asses again, I'm going to bring you this whistle.
And if Carlos Colon gets in the middle of you, what you're going to do? If Carlos Colon decides to be in the corner of his boys, of his sons, and it goes front to front with Bill Alfonso, what can happen?
Well, I'd have to get behind my giant because Carlos Colon is one of the toughest Puerto Ricans I know. I don't want no part of Mr. Carlos Colon, Daddy. When I went over there in the early 80s to Roberto Clemente Stadium, I refereed one of his matches. I bought him a box of Tampa cigars, baby. So I don't think he's going to mess with me, but blood is blood. He's going to watch after his boys. You never know. You know what I mean?
Of course I do. I'm going to translate that. La sangre es la sangre. Yo le pregunto, ¿qué ocurriría si Bill Alfonso en algún momento dado en la esquina de Vinicius y Ariel Levy se topara en Puerto Rico si esto llegase a ocurrir con los Colón, pero más allá que los Colón, con Carlos Colón? Dice que su amigo, que en su momento dado cuando vino aquel Roberto Clemente en los 80, le trajo una caja de cigarros de Tampa y no cree que eso ocurra, pero la sangre es la sangre pesa, blood is blood, como él menciona. How can you describe, going a little bit more in your life, how can you describe your relationship with Paul Heyman? I mean, there are so many stories about Paul, good ones, bad ones, regular ones, but all of them memorable.
Well, I've never had a bad experience with Paul Heyman since the 1980s. We've been great friends. I did nothing but good business in ECW, and I made great money. And we had a great time. I still talk to Paul Heyman all the time. He's one of my dear friends.
So I'm going to go to Spanish on this one. Paul Heyman es su gran amigo. No ha tenido una mala experiencia con él desde los 80, contrario como han mencionado muchas personas. Y continúa hablando. Es uno de sus mejores amigos actualmente. Let's talk about backstage.
And also, let me mention this. Paul Heyman gave me my highest... Well, in WrestleMania, I worked a wrestling match. I made $25,000. I did a pay-per-view, barely legal, for ECW, and Paul Heyman says, I don't know what to pay you. We did good. Fonzie said, well, pay me the same thing Vince McMahon paid me for WrestleMania. He said, how much was that? I said, $25,000. So I got a $25,000 paycheck for one night at barely legal. That's when I switched from Taz to Van Dam and Sabu. So he took care of me. I love Paul Heyman.
Good money. Let me say that in Spanish. Paul Heyman le preguntó que cuánto quería que le pagara. Aquel momento dado cobró $25,000 la noche por luchar esa lucha WrestleMania, y le pregunta a Paul Heyman, no fue muy bien, ¿cuánto quieres que te pague? Pues págame lo mismo que Vince McMahon. Y Paul Heyman le hizo un cheque por esa cantidad de dinero en aquel momento dado, y siempre cuidó de él, como siempre solía hacerlo con muchos de sus talentos. How can you describe the creative process on ECW? I mean, it's one of the most mysterious things, because we know how things work in WWE, how things work in WCW, but so far there's not many information about how things work behind the curtain on ECW. What can you say about how producing matches and everything?
Okay, I'll tell you this. If it wasn't for Todd Gordon and Paul Heyman, listen, WWF had millions of dollars in sponsors. WCW had Ted Turner money in his own station. We were on a shoestring budget. We were making $12 million a year and spending 13. No corporate sponsors, but we just did it, man. You had a bunch of guys that wanted to make this happen. After it started taking off and getting popular, and it kept growing and growing, man, we had to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, but it was just unbelievable. You had to be there to experience it. And we were a big family up there, a hardcore family, I may add.
En ECW menciona que todos eran una gran familia hardcore, que contrario a WWE, que tenía sus sponsors, que contrario a WCW, que tenía Ted Turner, ECW era desde abajo, era trabajando fuerte, invertían 13 millones y ganaban 12, o sea que siempre había una cantidad de dinero en pérdidas, pero siempre buscando llegar al tope hasta que eventualmente lo lograron.